Brilliant. Okay, so thank you for allowing me to talk this morning. I'm the institutional lecture capture lead at the University of Sheffield, so I was the academic who was tasked with the responsibility of ensuring that we had a rollout of an opt-out policy in Sheffield and back in 2017-18, but having done that, I've then continued to work quite closely with a whole range of people across the institution and also look at some of the data around my own department. And that's what I'd like to present today, some data that I've got around how our students in my department are using lecture capture and whether there's any correlation with their academic attainment. You'll notice I've got a little video link at the bottom. I'll come back to that at the end. I don't think I'll have time to play it, but if anyone's interested in how we support students in using lecture capture, we have this video that we've made at Sheffield under Creative Commons license and it's free to use. I'll show the link at the end as well. Is it going to go? Oh, it stopped moving. Let me just page down. Oh, it crashed.
Maybe it's because we're on the lecture capture thing rather than try it again.
There we go, that's fine. So obviously we're all aware that there's an increasing use of digital technologies, including lecture capture at institutions across the UK. In 2017, the estimate was around about 86% of institutions had some form of lecture capture processes going on. We're all aware that lecture capture is thought to be particularly helpful for students who have specific learning differences, where they need that additional support, where they're not necessarily able to process the information in a live lecture in the normal way that individuals that don't have these additional needs have. And if you look at the HESA data between 13-14 to 17-18, 10 to 13% of students declared disability, and quite a lot of these students are declaring a learning difference disability. And so we've got around about 229 to 303,000 students in the system that would benefit from having lecture capture. Having said that, as we've already heard this morning, lecture capture is quite contentious in terms of whether it's of real benefit. Does it impact on attendance? Does it impact on attainment, up or down? And so what I wanted to do, because at Sheffield we had this opt-out policy, is I wanted to do a piece of research that actually started to explore some of the links and the correlations between how students were using lecture capture and their academic attainment. Just to put this into context in terms of what we do at Sheffield, so what we have on the graph is the total number of lecture capture recordings at the institution against academic year. And here is the first year of our full opt-out policy, and this is last year's data. We have around about 34,000 recordings across the institution each academic year. And these are the main types of sessions that are recorded. And you can see the majority of the sessions that are being recorded are actually live lectures. And last academic year, 89% of all lectures delivered in lecture capture enabled rooms at Sheffield were actually captured and released to the students. Now, in my department, Biomedical Science, we've actually had an opt-out policy since 2014-15. This is us down there. And this came in because I did some work myself using lecture capture, and I was a skeptic. I'll put my hands up and confess that before I'd even used lecture capture, I was like, lecture capture, I don't like lecture capture. But I was aware that the institution was going to be bringing lecture capture in. I'm quite keen to get on top of technologies that the institution is going to use. I thought, I'll give it a go. So I gave it a go. I did some focus work with the students and did a 180-degree turn, literally, at the end of the module because of the feedback from the students. And as a consequence, then spoke to my department and we rolled it out. So we've got a lot of data in biomedical science over the last few years. But what I want to talk to you today is about some data I captured last year with some level 2 students. So just one final thing before I go into the data. I've alluded to things like attendance and how students are using captures. I think it's really important that we recognise that students are not instinctively set up to recognise how to use lecture captures. So we want them to use them appropriately, because if they don't use them appropriately, it can actually impact on any potential benefit that lecture capture has. So what we want them to do is not watch the whole lecture. We want them to be dipping into the parts that they didn't understand from the live lecture. We don't want them to speed up and watch it at 1.5 times speed or faster. I've heard of some students trying to watch it 2 and 3 times speed. There's no benefit for that. We don't want them using a stop-start approach where they start the recording and every time they miss something, they stop, they go back and they write and they end up with these huge set of notes that are not what they would have got from the live lecture. And then they come to revise and they've got way too much content and they've missed the point. So we want them to be using the captures more effectively. We don't want them to be binge watching right at the end of the academic year, just before their exams. Hold that thought and we'll have a look at some of my data. We don't want them to be last minute Larry, kind of looking at the last minute. And we don't want them to be focusing on learning lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of facts. Yes, they do need some factual information. They do need a background knowledge. But certainly in my department, in my modules, I want them to be really focusing on getting really the key facts, the really important information, but in getting a good understanding of concepts and also developing a skill set to be able to apply their knowledge and understanding to problem solve. So I decided last year to do quite a big piece of research with level 2 and level 3. I'm only going to present some of the data from the level 2 students and only part of the data because it's a really big data set. So what I did was take our academic year module. We have 2 80-credit modules and up to 172 students in the data sets that I'm going to show you. I captured information on how they were using lecture capture, analytics from the Echo 360 system, how they were using resources on the virtual learning environment, and also active learning. And in active learning in that, I've included in that in-class active learning, but out-of-class active learning participation in formative assessments. I'm not going to present anything around the VLE and the formative assessments today, but if you're interested, come and ask me, because I've got all of my data with me, and if you want to see what it looks like, there's some really interesting findings. I accessed the information across the whole of the academic year, so not just once, timestamps across the year, and just before their examinations. And I've compared the data to their attainment. In an MCQ exam at Christmas, I'm not going to show you that data today, but then at the end of the academic year, they have a short answer question essay assessment that spans the content that they've had across the whole of the academic year. So we very much encourage our students to integrate across subject areas in the module. And obviously, just to flag, I did get ethical approval from this from the University of Sheffield, and the students were really keen to participate, I have to say. These are just the different collection weeks, semester 1 and semester 2. I'm just showing that because it's kind of the same, but not quite. So 4, 6, 9, 12. Then we had Christmas, and then I took a snapshot just before their exam, and 4, 6, 9. Then we had Easter, a snapshot after Easter, week 12, at the end of teaching, and then again just before the examinations. So before I actually show you the findings, I'm going to give you the summary of the findings because I think it's really important. So does student use of captures really help their learning? So what I'm going to say is that it's actually really challenging to answer this question, and I don't have the answer to this, but I've got some indications. I'm a scientist. What I would love to do is take a big group of students, split them into 2 equal groups with kind of equal characteristics, and give half of them lecture capture and half of them not, and then assess them, and we can't do that. So it's actually really, really, really challenging. I've got some data right at the end from a module that I run from a few years ago that I will come back to in terms of how we might answer this question. But it is very, very challenging. And so what I'm going to say is the data I'm showing you is not saying, yes, lecture capture is great and it helps the students, or no, it doesn't. What I'm going to show you is some data that there are correlations. And they are correlations. I'm not saying that there's a direct link here. And the other thing I'm going to say is that the data is shades of grey. It's not black and white. Students are all different, and we wouldn't expect the data to be black and white. So again, I'm going to show you some trends and patterns of activity around use of lecture capture and academic attainment. So the first data I'm going to show you, so this is the percentage of the total number of lecture captures viewed. So of all of the lecture captures available, how many did the students look at? And what we've got is the whole student cohort mapped across that academic year from week 1 in semester 4 till just before their semester 2 exams. And this is literally the day before they sat that big short answer question essay examination. And what we can see is that actually over the year they're using more and more and more captures. So if they kind of all access 30% of the captures, we'd expect a horizontal line. So if they're accessing the same percentage captures across the year, then we'd expect that line to be horizontal. And it's not. So there's almost a groundswell of use. They start using some of them and they're using more and more and more and more and more. And there obviously is very much a trend here for using quite a lot more in the few weeks in the run-up to their big assessment. I'll show you the data in a moment, but I'll just tell you now that fail and pass grade students in the assessment typically use fewer captures at the start of the year, and their use remains low. What I've done here is a scatter graph. We've got their grade in the examination versus the percentage of the total number of captures viewed. This is semester 2, week 6. And there is a significant positive correlation, but it's shades of grey. It's very clear it's shades of grey. We haven't got a kind of nice kind of set of data there. It's very, very mixed. But what I would say is that for the MCQ exam and the SAQ essay assessment, every single time point, there's a significant positive correlation. So in general, those students that are watching more captures tend to be the ones that are getting the higher grades. What I did was then split the students out into their grade boundaries in terms of the assessment, so the grade they got in the assessment. So here again is the percentage of the total number of captures viewed, so of the total, how many did they watch? But now, and we've got it against the year, so all of the data points are there, but obviously not all of the labels. But we go from students that failed that assessment to got pass grades, 3rd, 2-2, 2-1, and first class grades. And if we start with the failed students first, obviously there's quite a big variation. There's only 5 students in here. These are the standard deviations. I've left them as standard deviations. But I think what you can see is, if we look, they're watching around about 20% of the total available captures at the beginning or at week 4. But it's quite interesting that that then drops. So they're just not looking at the captures. So one of the arguments from some of the staff at Sheffield was that the weak students are going to be the ones that are watching loads of the captures and they're not going to succeed. But actually my data shows completely the opposite. So what I can see is the students that are not doing so well, they're just not using the resources that are made available. And then look, okay, so we got Easter and the run up to the exam period. They suddenly have this binge watching. So not only they're not using the captures during the academic year, they're having this massive binge watching as they run up to the exam, which we know isn't going to work. It's not effective. Pass level students, the line here I should have said is just the top level, the maximum that the failed students used, and it's below kind of these guys across the board. So even at the end of the year after their binge watching, they've not used as many resources. Pass level students start low a little bit. Again, there's a hint that they've got this kind of surge in use. The interesting thing for me is the 3rd, 2-2, 2-1, and the 1st. There's not really a lot of difference that I can see in there. So the differences in here might be around what they're actually physically doing with the captures. And actually, of course, there's students are not all at the same ability. There's a range of abilities. But I think the key thing for me is the students that are struggling, they're not using the captures. And then if we take the mean, and I take the kind of fail and the pass students, 71% of these students are below the mean. Whereas if we take the 2-1 and the 1st students, only 41% are below the mean. And I'll come back to the fact that some of the higher achieving students are not using the captures a little bit later on. So that's how many did they watch. I then looked at how many views, so how many times, how many hits. So we can have multiple hits on a single recording that's been made. So as expected, as they go through the year, the whole cohort, there are more captures available each week, so there are more views. So we would expect this to be going up throughout the academic year. I was quite interested in that there's perhaps a hint, a little bit of a surge, but there's no obvious kind of mass increase in the number of views across the whole of the cohort. Again, I've mapped this performance in the examination against the total number of views. And again, I can see a significant positive correlation. Again, this is all time points for the MCQ exam for semester 1 data, and across every time point across the year for the short answer question SAQ essay examination as well. But again, shades of grey. There's variation. There's some students do really well and they don't use the captures, and some students use the captures and do really well. Again, fail and pass grade students have got fewer views and show late increases. Again, if we just look at kind of teasing out a little bit more from the data, here's the mean number of lecture capture views for the failed students, pass and all the way up to the first. Again, I'll start with these guys this time. Again, there's not massive differences there, so there's some interesting things going on around how they're using the captures. Again, it alludes potentially to around differences and ability potentially of the students as well. But the failed students, once again, they're not viewing lots of them, so of course they've got lower number of total views. And again, we've got that sudden surge in views of lecture captures right before the examination period. And again, here's the pass level students, so they're not really used it very much. I do wonder whether they had a sudden wake-up call after the first examination period and thought, ooh, I haven't done very well in my first exam. Maybe I need to do a bit more work. But then, of course, they then have that sudden surge again. If anything, the thirds are a little bit down, but actually the firsts look a little bit lower than the 2 1s and the firsts. But again, they're the stronger students. Okay, so they might not need to use the captures. Again, if we look at just the kind of putting these together, 86% of the fail and pass level students are below the cohort mean, but only 48% of the higher achieving students. So more of the failing and the struggling students are not using the captures. What I thought would be quite interesting would be to go back with the cohort that I had and map their what kind of student they were. Were they a really strong student? And were they a weak student? And to do this, I looked at their grade from the previous academic year. So each of the colour spots here and the grade here represents their grade in first year. So the red spots are students that got pass level grades at the end of level 1. And you can see that we've got one student here who literally scraped through first year, but actually achieved a pretty good grade. Kind of a mid 2-1 grade. Obviously, they've got lots of use of lecture capture. I did wonder when I saw this data, I got quite excited. I know it's only one student, but I thought, oh, I wonder if they didn't use lecture capture last year. No, they did. And they had quite high use of lecture capture. So I don't know why all of a sudden they've turned it around. Maybe they're using the lecture capture differently. And obviously, without talking to that particular student, it's really hard to try and kind of tease that data out. But I think the kind of thing I would say is if we look at the diamond symbols, they're almost all here. Don't know what happened to this student, but they're all kind of here. And you can see that the really kind of the students that are good students going into level 2, some of them use the captures, some of them don't. The strong students, it's up to them. Some students who are really strong, who did really well in first year, they've already got good learning strategies that don't require the use of lecture capture. And so the really strong students don't necessarily need to use a lecture capture. Again, the purple triangles here, they're the ones that got the 2-1 grades. Again, a little bit mixed. Some of them are not. Some of them got really good grades the previous year, but didn't do so well this year. I haven't had a chance to tease out their lecture capture use from first year. So I had really quite a high teaching load in semester 1, so I'm waiting for my teaching to die down so I can start digging into a little bit more of the detail. And again, if we look down, again, here's the pass level students. So you can see the pass, the black ones are the 2 2s. So what I would say is that the strong students, some of them do and some of them don't, and it doesn't matter. The weak students, some of them don't, and they're really struggling. Interestingly, I want to do a bigger dive of these individual students because they've used the captures, but they haven't done very well, and they're not particularly strong from first year. So we've looked at how much of the total numbers they've viewed, how many actual views they've got. What's really would be really good is if we could say how much. So how much of the captures did they watch? So they watched the capture. Did they watch all of the capture, half of the capture, 10%, 5%? But there's a big caveat. I can extract these data from the Echo 360 system, but two big caveats with the data. The student might press play and then go and make themselves a cup of tea or coffee or visit the bathroom or sit and play on their smartphone. So the system says they've watched this much, but I don't know that they've watched this much. The second caveat is around the Echo 360 system analytics. My understanding from talking to John is that if a student starts at, say, 5 minutes into a recording, watches 2 or 3 minutes, and then fast forwards, and then watches another bit, it will capture it as if they've watched. It takes the timestamps. So it's not necessarily very accurate in terms of reflecting exactly what the students have used. So we do need to be really careful when we're interpreting this data. But even given that, I thought it might be useful to analyse it and just have a look. So what I did is analyse how much of each of the captures that had been watched for all of the students. I excluded from this analysis any capture that a student had not viewed. So there are no zeros in the data. This is only looking at the captures that the students actually looked at. So what I could say is that, again, I'm not showing the data, but I've got a significant positive correlation with how much a student viewed and their attainment at all time points tested across the academic year. I should point out I only have semester 1, week 12, because at the time, the analytics on the Echo 360 system didn't allow us to extract very easily the percentage watched. I managed to find a workaround, but only at week 12. But then after that, the system changed and I was able to extract the information. And then again, I've broken them down. So what I'm showing you here, the first bar for all of them is week 12, semester 1, and the second bar is the day before their exam. I've broken it down into their attainment, again, in the short answer question essay assessment. And again, so what we can see, so remember, this is the mean percentage watched, but only the captures they've viewed. So it doesn't matter that these guys haven't watched as many captures. I've taken that out of the equation because if they didn't watch it, if a capture wasn't watched, the zero has been ditched across the board. And what we can see is that even when the students, the fail and the pass level students, even when they watch captures, they don't seem to be watching as much as the higher achieving students. But again, with that caveat that I have in place, and that I don't know whether it's like they actually are watching it, the bit that it says, or they're just dipping in. So there's a challenge there. But I think it's an interesting piece of information, even though there's the caveats around the analysis. So key points so far. So engagement with lecture capture is correlated with performance in the short answer question and essay examination. And I haven't shown the data, but the MCQ as well. You'll notice I'm using the word correlated. There is a correlation. I'm not saying that the lecture capture is why those students are necessarily getting those high grades. There's a whole load of factors that are going to feed into the grade that they get. I've shown you data on percentage viewed, number of views, and in brackets are commas, how much watched, because is it really how much watched? But it's an interesting set of data. It's not black and white. It's shades of grey. And we do have the chicken and the egg scenario. So are the students that are doing well because they're using the captures? Are the students are doing well because they're engaged students, and that means they're using the captures? So, and you can't tease that out. It's impossible. You can't tease that out. So again, that's just a caveat around the analysis. So I did ask the question, is this just an engagement effect? Is it just an effect that the students that are using the captures are just more engaged? They're using the VLE, they're using the resources. So I plotted VLE hours, so how many hours they spent on the VLE against the percentage of the total number of captured views. So that's the very first set of data that I showed you. And I got a significant positive correlation. So if they're on the VLE more, then they're using the captures more. So I've got a cold. I should point out that the VLE hours does not include the time spent watching the lecture captures. They get to them through the VLE, but the hours are captured separately on the Echo system. Our VLE doesn't count in here the hours spent watching lecture captures. The red dotted lines represent the mean. So I think this is 90 hours and around about 37%. So you can see it's quite varied. There is a significant positive correlation, so it suggests the more engaged students are more likely to use the captures. I've mapped this again with their performance in the assessment. Looking at this, the red's a little bit difficult to see, but here's some reds. So all of the reds, the fail students, are in here. So I suspect the fail students are failing because they're just not engaging with anything across the board, and they don't engage with formative assessments either. The pass level students, a little bit mixed. They're not really using a lot of the VLE or lecture captures, although some of them are, so we need to do a little bit of digging in there. And then as we go through, we can see a whole range of different patterns. But for me, the key take-home message is my failing students are failing because they're just failing across the board to use the resources that we've got available. So there's certainly some contribution in the data for engagement. So I still haven't answered the question. Okay, and these data are not going to allow me to answer the question, but it was never about, does lecture capture have a positive impact on attainment? These data for me were very much about engagement with lecture capture, and I want to use these data to set thresholds in my department for kind of warning flags for students to catch them before they fail. I want to be able to say, these students are not engaging with X, Y, and Z. They need to talk to their personal tutor, because if we get them now, they might not fail the assessment at the end of the year. So can we really dissect out the impact of lecture capture? I would say, actually, no, with a single cohort. You can't, not unless you're going to split them into two groups. Multiple cohorts, potentially, but we've got a challenge. In learning and teaching, what do we do every year? We reflect, we review, we change. And so that makes it really challenging to analyse across cohorts the impact of one thing, lecture capture. But I was quite lucky in that I have a final year module that I run, and it's the very first module I use the lecture capture in. And across the first 2 years that I used the lecture capture in that module, myself and my colleague who deliver that actually kept the module pretty much the same. So we had the same 2 academic staff. We had the same lectures in terms of content, minor tweaks to what that content was because the field had moved on, but essentially the same content. We provided the same level of support, the same active learning that we'd done in previous years, and we had the same assessment type. So what I was able to do with this particular module is take 4 years of data, 2 before lecture capture and 2 after, and just analyse the performance in the module. So we've got an of 240 students before and 282 students in the 2 years after we did lecture capture. My modules are very popular in 3rd year. And these are the data that I got. So if we look first at the graph, we've got percentage of students getting the different grades in the assessment. I will fail my students if they don't meet what they need to meet to pass. I know it's a final year exam, but I'm pretty ruthless. They don't answer the question, they don't pass the assessment. Black on the graph is pre-lecture capture, and red is post-lecture capture. And what I can see is there seems to be fewer fails, passes, thirds, and 2 twos, more 2 ones, and more firsts. And if we take the module grade, the mean is 60. Post is 62. And it doesn't look like that's a big uplift, but actually from kind of working out a mean value for the module, that's quite a big uplift. And what I've done is just do the numbers here. So that's the number of students getting firsts and 2 ones, and the percentage pre and post lecture capture. So 50%, 65%, 43, 32, 63, and 2%, 3%. And these are significantly different. So what I hope is that these data from this particular module is showing, well, there could be a positive impact of lecture capture on academic attainment. I'm going to put a little caveat on that and say I have analysed one other module in 2nd year, and I don't see an uplift. So I don't think it's a one-size-fits-all. I think it varies from module to module, from level to level, from the type of content that you're delivering, from the type of skills that you want to develop in your students. And I would say for some modules and some skills development, lecture capture is going to have zero impact, completely zero impact in terms of the development on the students. So lecture capture is not a one-size-fits-all for everything. It's very nuanced, and but it is valuable, I think, in terms of supporting students. So in terms of key points, what I've shown you is that engagement with lecture capture is correlated with short answer question, essay, and the MCQ, though I haven't shown you the data performance. I've flagged that it's not black and white, it's shades of grey, and I'm in the process of writing this work up as a paper, and I'm doing a much deeper dive of the data to try and extract some interesting trends, particularly for the kind of fail-pass students and then the upper end as well. I've shown you data from a longitudinal study that I did over 4 years, where lecture capture appeared to enhance performance. I certainly saw a significant increase in module performance. Non-quantitative analysis, I haven't shown you anything, but from an observational perspective, having introduced the lecture capture, one of the things that I saw as an academic were fewer emails asking the really basic questions. So I'd give a lecture. My lectures are quite traditional, although I'm currently in the process of mixing it all up. I've brought in loads of active learning this year, so I'm doing a big piece of research on that, so if you're interested, come and see me. I've got some really interesting data that I can show you. But I give a lecture, and in the past I would have given a lecture, the students had their notes, they'd go away, and then they had to make heads and tails. And I challenge my students. I expect my students, particularly in third year, to get maybe the first 20 minutes, and then I really push them deliberately, because they're third year, we need to push them. We need to be developing their abilities to problem solve. But what I found after we brought in the lecture capture is that all of those emails that asked the really basic questions because they missed something basic in the lecture and they didn't really get to grips with it and they couldn't get it from the reading, they would email me and I'd go, oh, for goodness sake. Okay, why are they asking me that? That's such a basic question. The amount of basic questions plummeted, I would say. I had hardly any. But what I started to see were emails coming in with much more insightful questions. So they'd go to the capture to get the basics that they'd missed. And then they'd read around, and then they'd think, oh, actually, that's interesting. Louise said this, but this paper says that. And then they'd send a really insightful question in, and that has continued. So I would say that, for me personally, my experience of lecture capture, having lecture capture available, is that it's allowed the students to have a bit more time to focus on the challenging aspects and ask those really difficult questions. And I also want to show you some quotes from students, because I think the student voice and what they think about lecture capture is really important. So here are 3 quotes from students. 2 from my department, and 1 from a student from the specific learning difference tutorial support team. So the student says, I have dyslexia and chronic fatigue. If it wasn't for lecture capture, I would have to drop out of university. For me, that says it all. Okay, having lecture capture available means a student that's really struggling with health and dyslexia means that they can do their studies and they can succeed and they can graduate. As a student with learning difficulties, I found the lecture capture videos more useful than simply using a dictaphone, because they had the visual aspect as well, and it's good revision material, especially for auditory learners. Again, goes back to what I said at the beginning. Students with specific learning differences really, really benefit from having access to the captures. But I don't think they're the only ones that benefit. I think all students benefit. This is the one that really made me think, and this is from one of my students, the very first year, the very first piece of research I did. I suffer from autoimmune inflammatory arthritis and had a serious flare and missed some lectures. In the past, I've suffered from anxiety over missed lectures, or forced myself to walk to lectures, making my condition worse. We should not be putting students in this position. Having lecture capture meant I could stay at home and recover properly without missing out on information. And it's been a major relief. And we all have students with health conditions that means that they struggle to attend. We have students with caring responsibilities that means that they sometimes struggle to attend. Our students are under immense financial pressure. Okay? A lot of our students have to work just to get money to buy food. And sometimes that work clashes with their teaching that they've got. And they can't change it because otherwise they're out of a job. And if they're out of a job, they can't pay their rent. And if they can't pay their rent, they can't stay at university. So I think there are so many demands on students' time that having the lecture captures there is absolutely, for me, the way that we can absolutely support students across the board. And talking about student support, one of the last things I want to go back to is my video. Do we have sound on the... Because we're a little bit ahead because we started early. So I'm going to play the video. So before we play it, this is the video that we've made that I mentioned right at the start of the talk. So we put this together based on a set of guides. So I've worked with a collaborative group headed by Emily Nordman that you may be aware of, and we put together a set of guides for how to support students, or how students can use lecture capture effectively. And at Sheffield, we've used these guides to put an institutional campaign in place this academic year to support our students. And there's a whole range of things that we've done, but one of the things we did was take the key points from the guide, turn it into a video. This video has no University of Sheffield branding on it. It has been designed for use by anybody who wants to use it. So the link is here. I'll play the video. If you would like to use it at your institution, please feel free. Just recognise that and say, as you know, from the University of Sheffield, because that helps me in terms of my impact. So, let me go here. No, I'll put it out. Let's move it up first.
Have you ever missed something that was said in your lecture, or had trouble understanding your notes when you got home? If only you could go back in time and hear exactly what your lecturer said. Oh wait, you can! And you don't need a time machine to do it. With lecture capture, you can watch a lot of your lectures online to fill in those frustrating gaps in your notes, as a refresher to clarify what you've already learned, or to catch up on a lecture you couldn't attend. But don't make a habit of skipping lectures with the intention of binge watching them later. They aren't always filmed and updated. So, if you're relying on lecture capture to attend your lectures for you, you could miss some vital information. When you're adding to your notes, it's best not to re-watch the entire lecture again. Instead, just watch the sections that you didn't understand. Also, try to avoid multitasking when you're watching a lecture capture. Put some time aside so you can really concentrate on what you've missed. You'll also be able to concentrate better by watching a lecture at normal speed. Don't try to speed watch the lecture, because you'll probably miss something important. Again. Lecture capture is a great way to enhance your learning and catch up on missing information. But remember, your lectures aren't always recorded, so if you skip them, you might still miss important points. It's more likely that you'll get better grades if you attend your lectures, and you'll also benefit from learning with and from your classmates. So there you have it. The ability to travel back in time. Use it wisely.
So the feedback that we've had from the students that we've shown this to at Sheffield has been really positive. They were chuckling, they were giggling, but that was deliberate, because we didn't want it to be a stuffy video. I forgot about that bit. We didn't want it to be a stuffy video. We wanted it to really appeal to the students, and you know, that's why we've gone with the graphics that we've gone with. And I should say that this is very much geared towards kind of recording of a traditional didactic lecture. But you know, in my own personal experience, I do particularly this year, I've done quite a lot of active learning in my teaching, and I've actually recorded those as well. And the students are really quite happy with that. So that's the end of my talk. I'm really happy to take any questions if anybody's got any. Yes?
Thank you for such an interesting talk, and probably for all the time that you spent digging through all that data.
Yes.
I just want to take you on a little bit of a tangent,
Mm-hmm.
because as I was watching this, I was lamenting these poor students that you kept on coming back to. They weren't watching this, they weren't engaged, they weren't going on the VLE. Is this why you're moving to more active learning?
So I'm moving to, I've always done active learning. I didn't know that it was called active learning. So I've been an academic at Sheffield for 23 years. And I would say, even from the word go, I've always put little questions in and things like that. But what I've done this year, what I decided to do was move to doing a lot more. I had the opportunity in my modules to restructure some of the content I was covering, and so I kind of mixed things up a little bit. So I'm covering the same content, but I'm covering it in different ways. And the reason I've gone to active learning is that because I did a little bit of research as part of this last year around doing some active learning in class and got such positive feedback from the students and that they found it really helpful, I wanted to do more. So I'm doing it for all of the student cohort, but I'm not sure it would actually help the students that are the failing students, because I suspect they're probably not turning up to lectures as well. We don't have a lecture attendance monitoring system at Sheffield yet. I'm trying to get one in because I want to be able to try and identify the students that are not attending, not to beat them with a stick, but to try and find out why and see what support they need, because there's something going on which means they're not engaging. So I don't think the active learning is going to necessarily help all of the fail and the pass students, maybe odd ones. What I'm more interested in doing in my department and then rolling out across the institution is trying to find a way of using the system to help identify those students before they fail their exams. Because if I can see in week 4, I can tell you week 4, semester 1, which of the students are likely to fail the examination in the summer, then I can intervene then rather than wait till the summer and they failed. So it's more about using the data to try and support those students that need that help. The active learning, I think, is just going to benefit all of the students, and I've absolutely loved it. I've never spent as much time up in the lecture theatre talking to groups of students while they're working in their teams, trying to answer a question. So I've delivered all of my lectures this last semester in the Echo 360 system as a presentation, and I've dropped in the questions using that system. And it's been absolutely fantastic because I've got all the analytics data in terms of how they've actually engaged with it. But I would set a question and then go up the steps in the lecture theatre and talk to the groups of students and help the groups that were struggling a little bit to answer. And it's been fantastic. I've really enjoyed myself this last semester. Yes?
You said that the students didn't mind being filmed. How did you give them notice about that?
So all our students know that the lectures are recorded, and we tell them if they're not because we're an opt-out. So they know that if they're in an active learning session, they know it's a lecture, it's being recorded, and I just would flag, just remember we're being recorded. They're totally fine. And a lot of the active learning I do is not about the students talking. They talk amongst themselves. A lot of it's using the online. So the Echo 360 system allows them to answer questions on an anonymous basis, low risk. And what I say to them is, if you're not sure, put the answer. You get it wrong, it doesn't matter. Nobody knows it's you. I know it's you, but I'm not interested in it, that it's you. I won't go chasing. And actually having that online system allows them to kind of, they don't want to put their hand up in class. We know that. We know that if you ask them a question in class, they just sit there and you can see them sliding down their seats because they don't want to cut their head above the parapet. But the online system is really low risk and it takes away the anxiety that the students have in terms of having to kind of speak in class. So there was some interaction, but most of what they're doing is I put them in a team. I say, right, yeah, there's a group, they're your team. Right, okay, here's the question. And I should say the active learning questions I'm using. So I'll give a lecture, and the last 5 or 6 minutes we'll have a question. The question isn't recapitulate something I've told you. It's right, we've covered this. These are the concepts that I want you to get. Now here's a problem. And you've got to use the information to solve the problem. So it isn't what can you remember, it's let's use what we've done to actually apply the knowledge. Actually, in terms of the third year students, I did that this year. When the first lecture I did, and I did this with them, because they weren't massively used to it, they were like, whoa, not really sure. And actually I was quite shocked at how much they struggled in the first instance. But by the time I got to the end of the module, their skill set had I could see that they had improved in terms of their ability to problem solve. And I'd actually say the level 2 students even more. The level 2 students, and again in the first session, they were like, "Ooh, this is a bit different. Oh, this is new." And I would have maybe, I think I had about 10 or 11 groups responded. And by the time I got to the last session, I was getting 40 to 50 responses because students were feeling really quite comfortable and confident. And they could put an answer in, and it's low risk, and it doesn't matter. So the active learning for me has been fantastic, and I've got all the analytics, and I'm also I've done a survey with the students, and I'm going to run some focus groups next semester with the students as well. Yes.
Hi. So in terms of sort of recording number of hits per video,
yeah.
Are they individual hits or just number of times the video being accessed?
They're an individual, so So a student can have more than one hit on a single video. So it's how many times they've physically gone in to watch the video. I'm busy trying to work out hits per lecture as well as overall total. But as you can imagine, it's quite a big data set. And I'm just doing it bit by bit as I go through all the different sections as I write my paper.
Would you have signage at Sheffield? Would you have signage declaring that there's recording in operation?
So the way this works at Sheffield is because it's an opt-out process. What we have is there's a statement that's in all of the programme handbooks around lecture capture, that it's there, that it exists, that it's happening, and that there's a statement in all the module handbooks, as well as a statement on how to use lecture capture, like the 5 top tips for the students. That's something new that we've done this year. So the students are very much aware. They get it when they come in at level 1. They're told, we've got lecture capture. The majority of the recordings will be made. If things are not going to be recorded, that's when we tell the students. So they know they're going to be recorded. If you've the kind of graph towards the beginning, most of it are actual traditional lectures, although that includes loads of things like my active learning. That's more the tag on the booking system, whether it's a lecture. But you can see there's other types of recordings. So there's workshops and tutorials and problem-solving sessions. So for those, I suspect that the academic's just going to remind them that they're being recorded. But we've never had any problem with any student going, I don't, ooh.
How do you deal with the moral rights of academics in terms of...
Yeah, absolutely. Yep, so we have so I was part of so they had a policy in place when they said to me, Louise, would you like to lead? And I went, oh, yeah, great. And then thought, ooh, what have I just said yes to? So we had a policy. It was quite defensive in its language, and I didn't like it. And so I rewrote it with a team. And we softened it. We shifted the policy wording around the benefits of lecture capture. And obviously, one of the concerns was from academic staff and from UCU. All of our staff own the performance rights for their lecture captures. So academic staff at Sheffield, you cannot use anyone else's lecture capture recording without their express permission. And we thought that was really important. It kind of soothed a few kind of ruffled feathers. So we can't use them again. We keep them for a certain length of time, and then they would disappear. There was a lot of resistance. I went round and I spoke to all of the faculty learning and teaching committees, and I was a little bit anxious, but I mean there was some resistance. But what I would say is that quite a lot of the staff who were like, oh, don't want lecture capture, no, we don't want it. I hear from the technical team were the ones that were contacting them. My lecture capture's not worked. What can I do? And so a lot of staff have changed what they think. Attendance is still bubbling. We don't attendance monitor at Sheffield, so we don't have the data. I would say it's very mixed, it's patchy. I would say it's cohort dependent as well. Our level 3 students in my department are just, oh goodness, their attendance is awful. But it was awful in first year, it was awful in second year, and it's awful this year. The level 1 and the level 2 students that we've got, attendance is fantastic. And it also depends on the academic. And it goes back to something that you said at the beginning about, should we just stand up there and talk to the students for 50 minutes, or should we be doing something different? And I researched on active learning, the free text comments. One of the students has put, if every lecture had active learning, I'd be much more likely to attend. So it's about making your teaching, it's about making it the value for the students to attend, because they've got lots of demands on their time. Some of them are just lazy. Like, come on. Some of them are lazy. They don't want to go out of bed for a 9 o'clock lecture on a Monday morning because they've had a hard night on a Sunday out in the pub or whatever. But some of them have got genuine reasons why they don't attend. But if you make your teaching a value for them to actually go and attend, then they will attend. Yeah.
On that note, just going to pause there just 1 second. If you've got any other questions for Louise, if you mind writing them down on a post-it, just we've got such a packed programme. We're going to get through everyone. Any questions to Louise? Just on that point, all tweet them. We have got some tea and coffee, I believe, outside now, so if we want to just have a quick 5-10 minute break, grab a drink, and bring it back in, and then we'll crack on with the programme.
That's fine.